All right, well, open your Bibles to Acts chapter 27. Acts chapter 27. Let me ask you a question. Do you consider yourself a leader? Should get like this. Nobody considers themselves a leader, right? At least by this world's standards, you know. If you're sitting here this morning or if you're listening online, you would probably say, nope, I'm not a leader. And by the world's standards, you're probably right. And there are some of us here that are considered leaders in one way, shape, or form, but by the world's standards, most of us are not considered leaders. The guy sitting on the forklift wouldn't be considered a leader. The person that's on the line and wouldn't be considered a leader, or fixing a piece of equipment wouldn't be considered a leader, or selling a piece of lumber, or inputting data, or serving a child lunch, or installing a camera, or taking a phone call, or helping a customer. They aren't considered leaders by the world's standards. But let me ask you another question. Are we living by the world's standards? Or are we living by, well, maybe somebody else's standards? You all know, at least I hope you've been paying attention, because I've said this lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of times. We are held to a higher standard. As Christians, we answer to a higher power. The almighty power that is our Father in heaven. And He is the one that sets the standards. We live to those standards. Even though there's no way we can reach those standards, we do everything in our power to live by those standards. We are held to a higher standard. Every move that we make, every word we speak, whether we consider ourselves a leader or not, will be judged. That's the way the world works. If you say, in any way, shape, or form, that you are a Christian, and then you do unchristian stuff, what example are you setting? You're not. Well, you're setting a bad example, actually. It's not good. We are required by this book, by our Lord, by our Father in heaven, to live to a higher standard. And whether you like it or not, the people around you hold you to that standard. Whether you want it or not, people hold you to that standard. Whether they say it or not, people hold you to that standard. Because trust me, if you're the person that is avoiding work and you say you're a Christian, people are going to think you're a hypocrite. Or if you're, whatever, if you're doing it, you steal the pen from work, or you're taking a nap on the job, whatever. I mean, there's so many different things that if you do that and you claim to be a Christian, you're setting a bad example, and you're just building on the fire that's already there, right? A lot of people think that as Christians, we are filled with hate, and we are hypocrites, and all kinds of different things. And if you do things like that, you are leading people away from Christ. God has a purpose for each and every one of us. That purpose is to lead a charge. That purpose is to lead the charge in spreading the gospel, the good news of Jesus Christ. We lead others to Christ by sharing His good news with them. We need to be leaders in this world, both for Christ and for the world. Look around you out in the world right now. Holy smokes. We are in a really bad spot everywhere. And things are in bad places. What do we need? We need good. We need Christ to shine through. And whose job is that? It's yours. It's mine. Wherever we are, that's what we do. Share the good news of Jesus Christ. Whether we're living it or we're speaking it or we're acting upon it, that's what we do. This text that we're in today and for the rest of the rest of the book of Acts, you just saw it on the video, went through the rest of the book of Acts, Acts chapter 27 and 28. Man, there's some exciting stuff in here. But along with being just a documentary piece, which is it's really easy to get lost in the documentary piece of what this is, because this actually is a documentary of the last trip that Paul took. And it tells you port, by island, by city, by whatever. And it tells you about Paul's journey to get to Rome. And it's easy to get lost in the fact that this is a documentary on the end journey of this guy named Paul. But if you read the scripture, you can see some things that you may not notice. And in this one, what I noticed right off the bat is the fact that Paul is giving us an example of how to be a leader, even if we're not a leader. Even if we're at the bottom of the totem pole, we can lead. And we can make changes for better by what we do and what we say and who we say it to. Let's read about half the chapter of 27. It's going to seem like a lot, but it goes pretty quickly. 27, verse 1. And when it was decided that we should sail for Italy, they delivered Paul and some other prisoners to a centurion of the Augustan cohort named Julius. And embarking in a ship of Adramyttium, which was about to sail to the ports along the coast of Asia, we put to sea, accompanied by Aristarchus, a Macedonian from Thessalonica. The next day we put in at Sidon, and Julius treated Paul kindly and gave him leave to go see his friends and be cared for. And putting out to sea from there, we sailed under the lee of Cyprus, because the winds were against us. And when we had sailed across the open sea along the coast of Cilicia and Pamphylia, we came to Myra in Lycia. There the centurion found a ship of Alexandria sailing for Italy and put us on board. We sailed slowly for a number of days and arrived with difficulty off Cnidus. And as the wind did not allow us to go further, we sailed under the lee of Crete off Salmone. Coasting along it with difficulty, we came to a place called Fair Havens, near which was the city of Lasea. Since much time had passed and the voyage was now dangerous because even the fast was already over, Paul advised them, saying, Sirs, I perceive that the voyage will be with injury and much loss, not only of the cargo and the ship, but also of our lives. But the centurion paid more attention to the pilot and to the owner of the ship than to what Paul said. And because the harbor was not suitable to spend the winter in, the majority decided to put out to sea from there on the chance that somehow they could reach Phoenix, a harbor of Crete, facing both southwest and northwest, and spend the winter there. Now when the south wind blew gently, supposing that they had obtained their purpose, they weighed anchor and sailed along Crete, close to the shore. But soon a tempestuous wind called the northeaster struck down from the land. And when the ship was caught and could not face the wind, we gave way to it and were driven along, running under the lee of a small island called Cauda. We managed with difficulty to secure the ship's boat. After hoisting it up, they used supports to undergird the ship. Then, fearing that they would run aground on the Syrtis, they lowered the gear, and thus they were driven along. Since we were violently storm-tossed, they began the next day to jettison the cargo. And on the third day, they threw the ship's tackle overboard with their own hands. When neither sun nor stars appeared for many days, and no small tempest lay on us, all hope of our being saved was at last abandoned. Since they had been without food for a long time, Paul stood up among them and said, "Men, you should have listened to me and not have set sail from Crete and incurred this injury and loss. Yet now I urge you to take heart, for there will be no loss of life among you, but only of the ship. For this very night there stood before me an angel of God, of the God to whom I belong and whom I worship. And he said, 'Do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand before Caesar. And behold, God has gained you all those who sail with you. So take heart, men, for I have faith in God that it will be exactly as I have been told. But we must run aground on some island.'" This is the word of God. Thanks be to God. So, before we dig in, let me remind you where we are. Paul has been arrested. He's been through 5 trials, every one of them resulting in no charges brought against him. He used his right as a Roman citizen to appeal to Caesar. Why did he do that? Because Festus wanted to take him back to Jerusalem to face the people in Jerusalem again. Paul said, "Nope, I've been there, I've done that, I got the t-shirt, I appeal to Caesar," which was his right as a Roman citizen. He could do that. He can say, "I want to go to Caesar." See, all right, it's like our current thing where we say, "I want a lawyer," and you don't have to say anything again because now you're being represented by a lawyer. So we pick him up in chapter 27 as he begins his journey to Rome to see Caesar. So, verse 1. "And when it was decided that we should sail for Italy, they delivered Paul and some other prisoners to a centurion of the Augustan cohort named Julius." Now, there's a few things of interest in here. Notice in the first part of this verse it says, "we." Who is the we? Luke joined Paul again, right? So Luke dropped out back in, I think, chapter 20, 21. Luke dropped out. I don't know where he went. He just kind of dropped out. And now he's back. So Luke is along this journey. And it also says that they delivered Paul and some other prisoners. They had this stash of prisoners that were going to go to Rome, and they had them there, and they decided to take all of these and then throw them on board a ship. And then they have this centurion of the Augustan cohort. Remember what a centurion is, right? Centurion is a leader of 100 soldiers, 100 men, right? A cohort is 6 of these centuries. 6 centurions followed with 100 men, so 606 of these men who were soldiers, okay? The Augustan cohort is kind of a neat story, because I was like, well, who's the Augustan cohort, right? Remember, Augustan is another title for Caesar, leader, the guy who was in charge, right? So these people, this cohort, these 600 men, were originally put together as people who were to care for the food needs of the Roman Empire soldiers. So they were kind of food service people, right? And so they because the Roman Empire is big, and they need to be fed. So these guys were put in charge originally of feeding this. Well, they had taken that. Everybody likes the food guy, right? How many of you remember being on board the ship? You were told? I was told when I checked on board the ship, I needed to get certain people, right? I needed to befriend certain people. One was a dispersing clerk, so my money was taken care of. Another was a cook, right? Well, so these guys were noted for that. They were the guys that had to feed everybody, right? And so, but they took advantage of that, and they kind of got this reputation of being like the special forces of the Roman Empire, because they started to become spies and things like that, and they'd find out what was going on, and then they sort of kind of developed from this food service to special forces, So it'd be like my wife Cheryl back there. She's food service, and now she's becoming like the the Marion Special Forces person. Yeah. Pretty awesome. You didn't know that, did you? So they did special jobs, right? And in this case, they were taking prisoners to Rome. Okay? And this was a centurion. There's no record of how many soldiers he took with them. I doubt it was the entire century. He probably didn't take all 100 of them with him, but he probably had some to go along with him. And embarking in a ship of adramitium, that sounds like something you'd see on a Marvel movie, right? Some special metal that something's made out of or something. But it's not. It's actually a port city, kind of up the coast and inland a little bit. And so this is where the ship was based out of. And they were about to set sail to ports along the coast of Asia. Now they had certain types of ships back then. Passenger ships were not really popular. They just weren't used, right? So people didn't just take cruises for fun, right? So they had certain types of ships. There were warships, and mostly there were cargo ships. And there were two types of cargo ships. There was the open sea cargo ship, and there were these things called coasting vessels. And coasting doesn't mean like when you take your foot off the accelerator. It doesn't mean that. Coasting means going up the coast, hitting each of the ports. And then basically they would be like the regional truckers that we see around, because they're just, out and back and out and back and out and back, that kind of thing. So these guys would take goods and stuff, or animals or whatever, some kind of cargo, from one port to the next, to the next, to the next. And they just kind of stayed along the coast, okay? So they weren't really open sea vessels. They just went port to port, staying next to the coast. They were cumbersome type ships as well. They didn't move or maneuver very well. They had one sail. And if you know anything about sailing, the more sails you have, the more you can maneuver the ship. Well, they just had one. They just needed to go and follow the winds up and down the coast. Okay, so they put to sea, accompanied by this guy named Aristarchus, a Macedonian from Thessalonica. So we've got Paul, we've got Luke, and we've got this guy named Aristarchus. He entered the picture back in chapters 19 and 20. We heard about this guy. So he's been hanging out with Paul for quite a while now. At least a few years he's been hanging out with Paul. And he's going along with him. It's interesting because Paul is a prisoner. And there would really only be two ways that a prisoner could have guests with him on a prison transport trip. One would be that if he was like an aristocrat and he had slaves, some of those slaves could go along with him. Or, and this is probably more likely the case, so Festus had a problem with Paul, didn't he? The problem was that Paul was innocent. Paul, in the eyes of the Roman government, this was a theological issue that the Pharisees and the Sadducees and all them were all upset about. So it's not a deal for him. So he was sending Paul to Rome to be tried before Caesar with really no charges. So he liked Paul, or he was okay with Paul. Okay? So he probably allowed Luke and Aristarchus to go along with him for that. Be my guess. We don't know why. We just know that they're there. Okay? It's either that or Paul lied and said, hey, they're my... And if you know Paul by now, you probably know that lying's not in his, it's not in his repertoire. Verse 3. The next day we put in at Sidon. Remember Tyre and Sidon along the coast. And Julius treated Paul kindly and gave him leave to go to his friends and be cared for. So they hopped up the coast to Sidon, and Julius let Paul go. So, you remember, and this has been a while back, what happens if a Roman soldier loses custody of his prisoner? Well, he gets the sentence for that. And if the sentence is death, he gets death. If it's imprisonment, he gets imprisonment, right? So he has to pay the sentence for the guy who escaped, right? So this centurion, Julius, is being nice, and he's letting Paul go away. Why do you suppose that is?
Because there was no sentence.
There's no sentence.
There's no charge.
Right? There's no charge. It's like, okay, so if he runs away, probably not a huge deal, but Festus probably told him, look, this guy's innocent, there's no charges, he's not going to cause any problems. He wants to go to Rome, he's using us as a bus to get to Rome. So, the interesting part of this that I looked up here was that Paul went to see his friends. Who were his friends? The local church, probably. It doesn't say that, but that's probably what it is. There's probably a local church there that was planted during one of his missionary journeys, right? Because he's still going along that area right there. And so he had been in Tyre, which is just down the coast from Sidon. And so he would have been known. And so he went to the local church to be cared for. That Greek word there is epimelia, and that's a medical term. So Paul is probably sick, actually, in this point. I mean, we don't know that for sure, but that being a medical term kind of leads me to believe that Paul's probably not feeling all that well. And if you think about it, he's been imprisoned for 2 years at this point, kind of, house arrest, whatever. And now he's on the ship, which is something he's done before. But for some reason, maybe Paul was sick. So he's going to be cared for by his friends. And putting out to sea from there, we sailed under the lee of Cyprus because the winds were against us. So, y'all know that I was a sailor. 4 years, 9 months, and 11 days I spent on board a ship. The same ship as Delaware, as a matter of fact. Right? We kind of... He was checking out as I was checking in. We didn't actually meet each other back then. That would have been ironic. But so let me give you a little bit of nautical information here from a salty old sailor. These cargo vessels were really cumbersome. They weren't meant to go out in the open ocean. Okay? The way they made the ships, this is not how they make the ships nowadays, but the way they made the ships back then, they didn't have bolts or welders or that kind of thing, right? So the way they put the ships together is they would get the wood and they would put it here, and then they would put this stuff, they called it pitch. It was like a tar kind of thing, and they would kind of glue the ship together. And they would have to keep doing this. They would have to keep coating it with this stuff because eventually it would kind of wash and wear away, and they would have to keep coating the ship with this stuff. That's how they made the ship work. And they would fit them into little slots and things like that, but they weren't really well put together. Okay, this is good information to have here in a few verses because they're going to do something that sounds a little strange. But so the other piece of information here is that there was this window for sailing in that area over there, right? And there were 3 seasons for sailing. There was the great season for sailing, there was the not so good season for sailing, and there was don't go anywhere season for sailing, right? So right now, they're in the not so good season for sailing. The most direct route from where they're going to where they want to go is out in the sea, straight across. But because this is the type of ship it is, and because the weather is like it is, they started sailing under the lee. Under the lee means that wherever the wind is coming from, they had the land between them and the wind. So the land would break the wind and make it a little bit easier than... Lost it there. So it's a little bit easier to sail there by the ocean, okay? Or by the sea. So that's what they did. They stayed close to land. and it shielded them from the wind. Verse 5. And when we had sailed across the ocean, the open sea, along the coast of Cilicia and Pamphylia, we came to Myra in Lycia. There the centurion found a ship of Alexandria sailing for Italy and put us on board. Now the first ship that they were on was headed back to Adramyttium. And remember I said it was kind of up the coast this way? Well, they still need to go this way. Okay? So they changed ships. And they got on a ship bound for Alexandria, which is actually closer to Rome than going this way. Okay? So they got on this ship, and remember that this takes quite a bit of time. Okay? They changed ships to one that's going more in the direction that they need to. But it's still one of these coasting vessels. It's not an open sea type of vessel. We sailed slowly for a number of days and arrived with difficulty off Cnidus, and as the wind did not allow for us to go further, we sailed under the lee of Crete off Salmone. So the wind wasn't cooperating, and they were having a difficult time, so they continued coasting along with difficulty, and then they came to this place called Fair Havens, near which was the city of Lycia. So they pulled into this place called Fair Havens. Wow. Life is not so good in weather-wise, and so they pull into this place called Fair Havens, right? You think, hey, this is great. But Fair Havens was not a nice place. I picture this like the pirate movies that you see where everybody's beating everybody up and stealing everybody's money and that kind of stuff. I picture it kind of being like that. That's the reputation that it had. So they didn't want to winter over there. Since much time had passed and the voyage was now dangerous because even the fast was already over, the fast being the Day of Atonement. The Day of Atonement, remember Old Testament, the Day of Atonement was when they said, we are sorry for worshiping the golden calf. Okay? So God reminded them every year, and so it's a fall festival type of thing. And it was late September, early October, they would have this festival and they would repent for worshiping the golden calf. But suffice it to say that the window for sailing had now closed. They needed to stay put because the weather was not going to cooperate. And so Paul says, hey, I perceive that the voyage will be with injury and much loss, and not only to the cargo and the ship, but also our lives. So Paul puts in his 2 cents worth. And he says, we need to stay put because we could lose everything. But the sailors and the captain and the ship driver, they all said, we don't want to stay in this dump. We need to move on. We need to go somewhere else. Verse 11, but the centurion paid more attention to the pilot and to the owner of the ship than to what Paul said. Did he do the right thing? Was he listening to the right people? Yeah, he was. He was listening to the people he thought were experts, right? These are the professional sailors. Wouldn't you listen to the professional sailor? That's what this guy's doing. He's listening to the professional sailors rather than listening to a Jewish Christian Pharisee apostle guy. Especially one who had been shipwrecked at least 3 times prior to this. Probably the right people to listen to. It's who I would have listened to rather than listening to this guy who may be well versed in the Bible, but may not be well versed in seafaring. And because the harbor was not suitable to spend the winter in, the majority decided to put out to sea from there, on the chance that somehow we could reach Phoenix, a harbor in Crete, facing both southwest and northwest, and spend the winter there. Let's go somewhere that we can at least have a decent winter stay. Phoenix was a much nicer place, a much nicer port that they could hang out in with much nicer weather conditions. Verse 13. Now when the south wind blew gently, supposing that they had obtained their purpose, they weighed anchor and sailed along Crete close to the shore. The weather was deceptively good. You remember those When I was a kid, we called them Indian summers, right? Because it would get really cold, and then there would be this really nice spell, and it was really a great time. And well, that's probably what they were experiencing, right? There was this little spot in the middle of October, toward the end of October, that said, "Hey, good weather." So they set sail. They were like, "Man, this is awesome. Let's hit the road." But soon a tempestuous wind called the northeaster struck down from the land. Wah, wah, wah. The infamous nor'easter. We still don't like them. And we're landlubbers, right? And when the ship was caught and could not face the wind, we gave way to it and were driven along. Uh-oh. I don't know where we're going, but hang on, because here we go. Running under the lee of a small island called Ceuta, we managed with difficulty to secure the ship's boat. Now, the ship's boat was every ship, even today, the big ships, have a smaller boat. In the Navy, we call them gigs or barges, depending on who drove it. Here, this was like a little dinghy, a life raft kind of thing that was being towed behind the boat by a rope. It would be hanging out behind the boat, right? And so what they needed to do was, when the weather got bad, they needed to get that thing back up on board the ship, or it was going to go away. Okay? So they did that. They got it back up. And after hoisting it up, they used supports to undergird the ship. This is what's important about that whole tar pitch thing, right? That didn't do a great job holding ships together in bad weather. So they took these straps and they would strap the ship together. Can you imagine the size of the cargo straps that you would need to go to the auto parts store to buy?
Can you imagine going under the ship in order to...
Oh, yeah, there is that too. You got, hang on, here we go. Here it is. Toss me down the next one. So they had to strap the ship together so it would hold it together a little bit better. Then, fearing that they would run aground on the Syrtis, they lowered the gear, and thus they were driven along. Lowering the gear is they pulled the sail down. They fastened the sail down, and they just said, "All right, wherever we're going, we're going. We can't drive this thing anymore. We just have to see where we're going to go." Since we were violently storm-tossed, verse 18, since we were violently storm-tossed, they began the next day to jettison the cargo. Got to throw stuff overboard. And on the third day, they threw the ship's tackle overboard with their own hands. They, the crew of the ship, did that. When neither sun nor stars appeared for many days and no small tempest lay on us, all hope of our being saved was at last abandoned. Now, a little bit later on, we see that this is somewhere between around 10 days and 2 weeks, because the entire trip was about 2 weeks. This part of the trip was about 2 weeks. They went without food for that long. And since they had been without food, verse 21, since they had been without food for a long time, they didn't carry a lot of food with them. How is it that a ship goes out to sea and doesn't have a lot of food? I remember when we were on board our ship, we had lots of food. Lots of food. We had to feed 7,000 people. And that's a lot. That's a crazy lot of food, right? And so we were like, we had all kinds of food on there. And then when we were out to sea, they would bring these other ships alongside us, and then they would bring more food over, either by helicopter or by this rope that goes between them. And they would bring those over, and they would replenish us underway. And it was really a cool thing, watching it happen, lots of fun, as long as I wasn't the one having to do it, because this is a lot of work, right? I did it just once. Whew. I'll never do that again. I guess I can't say that. I don't plan on doing that again. Paul stood up among them and said, "Men, you should have listened to me and not have set sail from Crete and incurred this injury and loss." Paul's like, "Told you so. Yet now I urge you to take heart, for there will be no loss of life among you, but only the ship." So everybody sing it with me. Don't worry. Be happy. Everything's gonna be all right. That's what Paul's doing. This is the first version of that song, right? Paul's like, hey, this is gonna be great. For this very night there stood before me an angel of the God to whom I belong and whom I worship. And he said, do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand before Caesar. And behold, God has granted you all those who sail with you. So take heart, men, for I have faith in God that it will be exactly as I have been told. But we must run aground on some island. So Paul says, never fear, we're going to be all right. God is good. Every last one of us is going to be okay right after we crash. So there's something I want you to pay attention to here. This is important. And this is a precedent that goes way back in the Bible, all the way back to Genesis. Does God protect people because of you? Does God protect others because of you? Listen to this. Genesis chapter 18. Anybody remember the story of Sodom and Gomorrah? What did Abraham do? Don't destroy them. If there's 50 people there, will you not destroy it? Will you save them if there are 50 righteous people there? What did God say? Yep. But there aren't 50. God, if there's 20 righteous people, and he just kept arguing, or not arguing, negotiating with God. And he got down to one. If there is one righteous person in those towns, will you spare the town? What was God's answer? Yeah. If there's one righteous person, I'll save that entire town. I'll save both of those towns. If there's just one. What ended up happening? Well, it didn't last very long, did it? Because there wasn't one righteous person. But if there was, he would have saved it. Genesis chapter 30, the story of Laban and Jacob. Laban wanted Jacob to stay with him because he was blessed by God just for the fact that Jacob was there. Remember, Laban tricked Jacob a couple of different times. Genesis chapter 39. God blessed the entire nation of Egypt simply because Joseph was there. An entire nation. He saved them from 7 years of famine because one righteous man was there. And this just goes on and on and on, all the way throughout. And here we are in the book of Acts, and we're toward the end of Paul's life, and God is saving the people around him because Paul is there. Remember that. Because there is one common thread here that you have to pay attention to. Each and every one of those people who were saved and the people that were saved around them, they listened to what God had them do. They were obedient to their job. Whatever that job was, however they were called to be used by God, they obeyed that call. And the people around them were safe. So you have a job. We talked about it already. What's your job? Share the gospel. Right? Share the gospel. Be obedient in that. Be obedient in that. Don't be obedient in it because somebody might be safe. Be obedient because that's what we should be doing. And the people around you will be blessed. Paul's like, man, I know you're going to be okay because I'm here. It's like getting on an airplane when you're a Christian. You know? So, yep, everybody's going to be just fine because I am here. God's not done with me yet. Therefore, you are going to land. And Paul was confident in that because he, from the moment that he had that interaction with Christ on the road to Damascus, he was obedient every bit of his life. And he was was confident in that. But we have to take responsibility, just like Abraham, Laban, Jacob, Joseph, Paul. They all took responsibility for what God has them do, the job that he has given them. And God has given you the job to spread the gospel. You need to take responsibility for that. So what is God saying through this text? I think a few things. Verse 22 basically says, take heart, God has your back. We need to be good with that. It's hard to see that. It's hard to understand that because we are a touchy-feely type of race, aren't we? Type of people. We tend to believe more in what we can see and feel and touch and taste and that kind of thing, right? Than what we can't. But we need to have that confidence that God is there and God is taking care of us. He has our back. And then in this text is the answer to the question, am I a leader? Do you think Paul considered himself a leader? Probably not. Would be my guess. I mean, he probably understood what he was doing by planting churches and bringing people to Christ, but I doubt he would consider himself a leader. But he was a leader. Look at his situation, right? The situation that Paul's in right now. What situation is he in? He's a prisoner. He is the lowest of the low by the world's standard. Right? So I'm at work. I have me, and then I have my boss, and I have his boss, and then there's some more people, some vice presidents and things like that, and then there's the people that run the company. I'm like on the bottom of the barrel here. Right? But does that make me any less of a leader? Paul is even lower than that. Right? By the world's standards, he has no rights. He has very little rights because he is, in fact, a prisoner. There's very few rights at the moment. But God has him on a mission. He holds him to a much higher standard than those that are around him. Paul isn't going to mess that up. So he stands up and he takes charge. The first time doesn't go so well, does it? It's like, hey, listen to me. I've been around. Maybe not as much as you guys, but I've sailed and I've been in shipwrecks. I really don't want to do this again. I can see this being a problem. And how does that turn out? Well, they don't listen to him because he's that Jewish Christian apostle Pharisee guy, right? Not a seafarer, not a sailor. But what happened later on? What he said was going to happen. What did that do for him? It established credibility, didn't it? I told you this was going to happen. And I love Paul in this. Neener. I told you. But he said, I could just picture him too, because I'll bet Paul kind of knew they weren't going to listen to him, right? He's probably like this. Yeah, I know it's not going to end well. You shouldn't leave. Not now. Don't go. You'll regret it. And they didn't listen. But what he said was going to happen did happen, isn't it? It's going on right now. Paul didn't get flustered. He didn't get mad at them. He did his part. And he trusted God. And he stepped up as a leader, despite his circumstances. And then when the next opportunity rolls around, he has more credibility, doesn't he? He has more credibility. They've been doing this for a couple weeks now, and he's probably, done his share of work and things like that, despite being a prisoner. He's probably helped out. He's probably started to make friends. Obviously, he's sharing the gospel with people on the ship. That's what Paul does. But because of what he said would happen, happened when the second time he steps up and says something, people listen. And this might happen to us. How many of you have been in a situation at work where, you say something and people blow you off?
Monday through Friday.
Yeah. It literally happens all the time. And you ought to be in the computer world, right? You want to talk about people that don't listen to people. I consistently get the same call from the same people with the same problem all the time.
How do I reset my password?
That's actually one that happened just recently. Oh, why don't you read the email that I sent that said how to do that? Oh, but I can't get my email because my password broke now. That's why I sent the email 2 weeks ago, buddy. Mm-hmm. Even though we may not be leaders by this world's standards, we are all leaders because we live to different standards. We live by different standards. We all have the responsibility to step up because, like it or not, believe it or not, accept it or not, God is using each and every one of us every single day. So as you're sitting on a forklift or working on the line or fixing a piece of equipment or selling a piece of lumber or inputting data or serving a child lunch or installing a camera or taking a phone call or helping a customer, you are a representative of the Most High God. And that makes you a leader. Amen.